What's up, everybody? It's Izzy, and in this video we're going to talk about tempo work for powerlifting. Now, many of you are probably familiar with tempo work more from like bodybuilding circles, because bodybuilders will often have a slower tempo on the way down or a slower tempo on the way up too, as a means of, mixing things up and trying to get more hypertrophy through increased time under tension. Now, most of the time when powerlifters program tempo work, it is really not to try and get more hypertrophy from the movements. So in this video, what I'm going to focus on is what might you use tempo work for in the sport of powerlifting specifically, and how to implement it, when to implement it, and things of that nature. So there's three components to any tempo type of movement. One is how fast you go on the way down, the other is how fast you go on the way up, and the other is if you're going to pause it. So typically, the way that tempo work is written, let's say I wanted you to do 4 seconds on the way down on a bench, pause it on your chest for 1 second, and then go up as fast as you can. I would write that as 4-1-0 tempo bench. And that would mean a 4-second eccentric, 1 second pause on the chest, and as fast as you can on the way up. So there's lots of ways to use tempo, right? Because you can adjust the tempo of just the eccentric, of just the concentric. You could add a super long pause, which is technically tempo work, and then you could do some combination of any of those three. So probably one of the primary reasons that you're going to get tempo work in your program is if you have some sort of a technical error that going slower might help with. So some examples of this might be, knee positioning in the squat or even in the deadlift as well. And maybe what your elbows are doing in the bench press, so how much you're flaring. As you go slower, it just simply gives you time to think about making sure that everything is tracking properly. Another thing that tempo work can do is really expose any flaws in your positioning, because if you're going down at a slower pace or going up at a slower pace and you get out of position, the difficulty of the movement is magnified because of the slow pace. You can't kind of, shoot through the part that you're messing up because you're forced to go slow by the whole idea of tempo work. So tempo work can be really good for helping to fix technical flaws, but also to expose them, because if you're going slow, again, it just makes it that much harder when you mess things up and get out of position. Now, that's probably the primary reason that you're going to have tempo work in your program, but another really simple reason to have tempo work is if it helps you work around an injury. So as, of course, will be obvious to anyone who does any sort of tempo work, the thing is that you're not going to be able to handle the same amount of weight that you normally would. I mean, of course you can't, right? Because you're forcing yourself to go slower. So sometimes tempo work can help you work around injuries, because the more slow, controlled, eccentric type of tempo work will necessitate that you use less weights and with less dynamic movements happening, less crashing around in the movement. It can sometimes be what you need to avoid nagging injuries or just simply work around them on particular movements. So that's another reason that you'll see tempo work in there. And of course, as I've mentioned in previous videos, eccentric loading can be beneficial for tendons. So another benefit or potential benefit of tempo work from time to time. Now, I think probably by far the biggest reason that I use tempo work personally, if I'm going to program it for somebody, is to increase the amount of technical weekly exposures to a certain lift. So let's say that somebody is really struggling with their sumo deadlift form, or let's just actually say this. Let's say that somebody is new to the sumo deadlift. They're completely new, they're a newbie. And the thing is, though, is that they still have problems recovering from deadlifting any more than, say, once a week. Well, what you can do is you can add tempo work, and it might have to be somewhat of an extreme tempo to keep the weights down enough. But with tempo work, you can add a light exposure that's still going to be, challenging for the lifter, and at the same time, it's not going to add so much to the recovery debt, because it is lighter. It is necessary for it to be lighter in order for you to keep maintaining the proper tempo. So again, you get another weekly exposure to the lift without driving your recovery over the edge. And then on top of that, with that, additional weekly exposure, because it's at a slow tempo, it helps you learn the movement. And this can enhance your rate of motor skill acquisition. So a lot of you guys are probably familiar with pretty much any other sport besides powerlifting. Like we could say soccer, football, baseball, basketball. Most of the times athletes will practice skills slowly, and then only over time, as they become more comfortable and more confident with the skill, will they start trying to work that skill closer and closer to game speed. Well, powerlifting, of course, isn't as dynamic and demanding in terms of, technical ability as, team sports. But at the same time, the concept still applies to powerlifters, right? Moving the bar slowly but correctly gives you a chance to learn the correct motor pattern at much slower speeds, which for many people is a huge component of learning things properly, correctly, and just simply more quickly. Because learning things at high speeds, especially new things, can be difficult because you have the challenges of course, moving the weight as fast as you can, or at least lifting the weight hard, and at the same time trying to maintain a newish motor pattern. So tempo work is really great in these situations. It really helps people to improve technique. It can help increase your weekly technical exposures to a lift without adding a ton of new fatigue, simply because the weights are by necessity going to be lighter in order for you to maintain the tempo. And then the other one is that if you're coming back from an injury of some kind, tempo work can allow you to train the lift without using loads that might aggravate whatever problem that you were having. So all in all, I think tempo work is definitely a great tool to have in your toolbox. It's certainly not necessary for everybody, and you don't need to all go out and add it into your programs right now. But if you're looking for a light day variation that helps instill good technical execution, tempo lifts are a great tool to have in your toolbox. So make sure that you know what they are and how to use them if you end up needing them. Anyways, my friends, hope you enjoyed the video. As always, good luck with your training. Have a great day, and peace.